short film for MGM, which is really wonderful if you get a chance to see it, called Manhattan Serenade.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
That was filmed in color. And it's just amazing to see Nina Mae McKinney in color dancing. And it kind of gives you an idea of what the musical shows were like in that time period and why they were so popular and why they were so popular with white audiences.
And she was one of those actresses you mentioned in the book that she said she didn't want to play maid. She definitely didn't want to do that.
She resisted that as long as she could, but ultimately she had to play the maid at the end of her career. But in between, she found a couple of interesting roles that departed from either the Mammy or the Jezebel, which is quite incredible considering the times. She starred in a 1931 film called Safe in Hell.
Right.
And she was a Creole hotel keeper. And then she was in another British film with Paul Robeson, Sanders of the River.
Yeah, and let me back up a minute. As far as the Safe in Hell, that one, she is actually the protagonist in that. As far as she's kind of, even though there's a white actress who's the star of it, she's actually the one that's kind of, and you can see this online too. This movie is on YouTube, and check it out, listeners. But she is the one that's kind of like moving everyone around. Everyone kind of goes to her for everything. And
she's definitely the best part of the film. That's for sure. And it's nice to hear her talking just in, regular language. The producer or the director allowed her just to use her own voice rather than a black dialect. And she's funny and she sings. And she's really is the best part of that film.
Now, Sanders of the River, and I have to tell you this of Valerie. And by the way, listeners, if you're just tuning in, I'm talking with Valerie C. Gilbert, author of the book on McFarland Press, Women in Mixed Race Representation in Film, 8-star profiles. And I have to tell you this, I've had Sanders of the River in my DVD collection for years. It's a part of a collection of Paul Robeson movies. I only looked at it this year when I got your book. I refused to look at that movie because of what I've read about it, the clips I've seen at it, but I finally looked at it. And she, again, rises above the movie. And I don't want to get into real detail in the movie, except to say that Paul Robeson is in Africa, dressed, he's basically almost naked, wearing a costume that has a tail in it. He's called Bo Sambo. And he defers to the white folks that are in charge because it's British colonialism in a mythical African nation back in the early 30s. But Nina, she really rises above that movie. But there's one thing in it that they do to her, because you were talking about the dialect earlier. They let her talk at some points with her own voice, but I noticed when there's a long dialogue, that's a British actress. That is not her voice.
That's true. I noticed that too, and I couldn't really find anything in my research about that, but I definitely noticed that her voice had been dubbed with a British actress's voice.
But it's a movie that I really would recommend people look at to, kind of dissect her role, but also what Paul Robeson is not doing in that, and how, you actually see how racism acts in some movies back then. It still does today. It's a really fascinating little movie. But yeah, Nina, she tries her best to make a career in Hollywood, but it just doesn't pan out, as you're saying, and she ends up having to do maid roles and all that. And her last major role, if you want to say, is in the movie you talk about, Pinky, which is we could do a whole show about Pinky and talk briefly about that.
Well, that's like Imitation of Life is another film about a light-skinned Black woman who passes for white. She's from the South. She goes north to go to school and to work, and she finds out when she's up north that people take her for white, so she goes along with it. The difference between Pinky and Imitation of Life, the original Imitation of Life, is that the light-skinned Black woman is played by a white actress, which after Imitation of Life would be the pattern, that
Right.
these light-skinned Black characters are played by white women. And then
and that's Jean Crane. Jeannie Crane.
Jean Crane. Yeah.
It was just terrible in that movie. All the Black characters in that movie, they rise above her. And Nina May, even though her role is it's minor, you can see, the fire she brings to that role. And you're saying, and she's older, than, and you can just see that, this should have been a major star in another universe. You can just see it.
That's true. Yeah. My favorite Nina Mae McKinney film is Gang Smashers. I don't know if you've seen that one.
Yeah, it's I haven't looked at that yet, but I read, reading your book, I got to find it. I hope it's on YouTube because I want to see that.
Yeah, I mean, in that film, it's a race film, so it's an all Black film, 1938. But she does everything in that film. She sings, she dances, she's an action heroine, and she's also a romantic heroine. And that is just so unusual.
And that's a shame that she never got the opportunity at major films in Hollywood to do that, to show her, her talents. Now I want to switch gears and just talk about another. You mentioned her earlier, but talk a little briefly about Freddie Washington.
So Freddie Washington, much like Josephine Baker and Nina Mae McKinney, she started out as a chorus girl. She was also from the South, and like many Black Americans, joined the Great Migration, moved to New York. She was a secretary, but she found out that as a dancer, she could make a lot more money. So like many Black women of the day, she was a chorus girl. And she was a little more, what's the word I'm looking for? Very conscious about the kind of roles that she would take on. And so, for example, in Imitation of Life, which is her biggest and best known film, when she got the part, the studio assumed that she would sign a contract like all actors and actresses of the day did. But those contracts essentially gave the studios complete control over the actress's professional life. And she did not want that. So she was savvy enough in 1934 to negotiate her own one picture deal.
That's amazing. I mean, that's something, because, those studio contracts are set up for life, but the roles you had to play and being a Black actress, there's no telling what they would have put her in.
Exactly. And so she knew that, and she didn't want any part of that. So she did the film and, was able to negotiate her own deal.
And the Imitation of Life, listeners, if you haven't seen it, is one of the, and I'm talking about the original Imitation of Life, because there's a second one in 1959 with Lana Turner and with Susan Connor.
Yes.
Who plays the Freddie Washington role. And Susan is, actually, it's funny because she's a white actress, but years later, they were trying to say, I read something that said that she actually was part Mexican.
Yes, I read that too, but I think her father was Mexican and her mother was white.
Yeah, something, I think I read that initially in Jet magazine or something way back when. They were trying to say, well, actually, she wasn't all white, but still, she wasn't a black. She wasn't a black.
She was
woman.
not Black.
definitely that. But getting back to Freddie Washington, for some of you out there, you really should check that movie out because it's a pioneering movie. Not so much as because of the issue as Valerie was saying earlier about race, because you still don't see that depiction of someone trying to pass. I know there was a movie on cable called Passing that came out last year, but it's a rare thing to actually see that and to see the reaction of the characters in the movie about that. And keep in mind that this is 1934 and it's made. It's a pioneering movie. It's something that is was sensational for the era. And when you look at it, it still is. It's a hard tuck. And I think the woman who played the mother, Freddie's mother, Hattie McDaniel, she should have got. They wouldn't give her an Oscar back then, but she should have got something for it.
Yeah, she did a great job, and the critics loved her in that film.
Because she rises above the stereotype.
Yeah,
she could have eaten. Because later on in her other films, she plays the mammy as the man, the happy-go-lucky, but she showed all sorts of emotion in that. And that's one of the great performances, both of those characters, her and Freddie, in any film, in film history. So please check that out. But yeah, Freddie, talk a little more about her as far as her role, as far as her activism.
Yeah, she was definitely an activist. She helped form what was called the Negro Actors Guild, which was formed to create fellowship among Black entertainers, but it was also open to whites. It helped actors negotiate contracts with producers, and it also acted as a casting agency. So she was very involved in that. And then she was also a writer for her brother-in-law activist newspaper, and her brother-in-law was Adam Clayton Powell Jr.
People aren't aware of that. A lot of folks aren't even aware of that. Her sister married Adam Clayton Powell.
Yep.
A very strong activist person. The Washington sisters, they said they were just amazing. That no one wanted to, they knew they couldn't tangle with them. They were politically savvy and they knew what they wanted. And that was something for that era. I mean, that was really something. That was really amazing. But but Freddie was like, this sets the standard for a strong Black presence as far as in movies and also in entertainment itself. Because I think there are a lot of actresses that followed her who like put their foot down on some roles that they wouldn't do. And you talk about some of these actresses in the book, and we could spend all day talking about the various actresses in this book. But I want my listeners to go out there and buy this book and read about the other actresses, read about the ones we've talked about, so they can learn some history about, how Hollywood deals with us as Black folks, how Hollywood deals with Black actresses, and just how, and the history of what we've had to go through over the years. And as I said earlier at the beginning of the show, you have done a great job with this book, Valerie. And I got to have you on at some point to talk further about this book and some other projects you may be working on. So I want you to tell my listeners how they can reach you. If they want, talk to you further, if someone wants to learn about, your process as far as how you research anything in general. Do you have a web page or anything?
I don't have a web page right now, Greg. Sorry, I was not expecting that question. What would be appropriate way to answer that?
Well, Greg? Yeah, if they want to reach you through LinkedIn, you can give them. You're on Twitter too, so give them your Twitter address.
Okay, hold on.
Well, you gotta know that by heart. Come on.
I don't.
Oh.
I'm terrible.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I probably sprung that on her.
But edit that part out.
Okay. No, we're not gonna edit that. This is spontaneous. I like this. But she has a Twitter. Just go to Valerie Gilbert on Twitter. Go ahead.
Reach me You can reach me on Twitter at Valerie G 5433.